Support comes from Dakota State University. What happens when you unite dynamic minds with one revolutionary vision? A rising force on the cutting edge of everything. From a little university on the prairie to a cyber powerhouse of the plains, we're proving the nation's best cyber can come from where you least expect it. Now, we're molding the future of cyber, AI, and quantum computing one graduate at a time. See what Dakota State University is building next at dsucyber27.com.
This day is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. Hello and welcome to This Day, a history show from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, October 1999, several hundred people gathered on the campus of St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. I don't know if people have been there. I've been there. Very lovely campus. It was a solemn affair, a small ceremony that day in October. And the crowd watched as crews in hard hats with chainsaws began to take down a 400-year-old tulip poplar. The tulip poplar usually only lives for a couple hundred years, so the fact that this one was 400 years old was notable. But the really notable thing about this particular tree was that it was the very last of the so-called Liberty trees. These were trees up and down the East Coast from Boston all the way down to South Carolina that served as gathering spots for Revolutionary War adjutants. Under these trees, groups like the Sons of Liberty would meet and plot and plant the seeds. I'm sorry for saying that. Plant the seeds for the American Revolution. So let's talk about the last of the Liberty trees and how looking at the American Revolution through an arboreal lens may change our understanding of this country's independence. Here, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Vanderbilt and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
Each of you gets 2, maybe 3 tree puns or metaphors. I've already used one, but that's our quota.
I think we can hit it.
You can live with that?
I think so, too.
Yeah.
We can branch out after we cover our 2 or 3.
Oh, boy. So look, we have this gathering. The tree, I should say, was damaged by Hurricane Floyd, and that is ultimately what led to this poplar having to come down. Again, 400 years old, pretty old for a tree. But let's start there in 99, and then we'll go all the way back to the 1700s. But Kellie, what does it look like when you have to take down this tree?
Oh my gosh, this just makes me so sad because I remember when I bought my first house, we had this huge cotton tree and it was probably about 200 years old and it gotten some sort of disease and they had to the Park Service had to cut it down. And I was like, wait, no, please. And he's like, ma'am, if we don't take this down, we're going to have to take down every single tree on this block because the disease will spread to all of the other trees.
Were you like 3 signers of the Declaration of Independence met under this tree? And he was like, I don't believe you.
There's nothing sadder than seeing a tree cut down, and it's actually a very intensive process. And there's no difference in this tree. It's about 120 feet high and 26 feet in diameter. So this is a really large tree, and this is also a tree that like St. John's College had their commencement under. So it was also a special place of thinking about transitions and graduations and gatherings. It had all of that symbolic weight to it. And so taking it down was no small thing. And then
it was kind of on life support at that point, right?
Yes. After the hurricane hit, they realized, okay, we really do have to take this down. And so they made a ceremony of it. They had a bell toll 13 times for each of the original colonies. And then after the bells rang out, the crews got to work and they started to dismantle the tree, which took a few days to do.
It was already kind of a Franken tree, right? Like it had been hit by lightning before and there were hurricanes that had come through. So it definitely still had some of the original tree, but it was also like concrete and wires. So I would imagine that would make taking it down a little trickier too, because you're not just cutting straight through wood.
Yeah, for sure.
Are the two of you ready for some fun facts about the tulip poplar?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's a state tree of Indiana. Fun fact number one.
There you go.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
This was gonna be my last fun fact, but it is indeed the state tree of Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. So it's like, come on, guys, get your own tree. But 3 states have their own have it as the state tree. As you said, it can be very, very tall. Some of them reach up to 200 feet. Its leaves look like a cat's head. Its flowers look like tulips, which is where it gets its name. But it's not actually a poplar. It is in the magnolia family. And then Native Americans it has very tall, obviously very straight trunks. And so they built a lot of, it was used to make canoes a lot, this particular tree. All right, that concludes our Tulip Poplar Corner. And let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. But yeah, so that's 1999. They finally have to bring this thing down. Let's go all the way back to the Revolutionary War era and talk about this tree, but moreover, the larger idea of Liberty trees. What were the Liberty trees?
Liberty trees were cool. It's one of those things that as you read about it, you realize, I don't know, like there's something sort of kitschy but amazing about this revolutionary period. And the Liberty trees are part of this. So the first Liberty tree, I believe, is in Boston, which is the birthplace of the revolution, obviously looms large in revolutionary history. And back when Boston was founded, just about 16 years after it was founded, somebody planted a giant elm. And fast forward 100 or so years later, and it is under this giant elm that you get this group of 9 patriots. At the time, they were called the Loyal Nine. They will eventually be called the Sons of Liberty. And they're plotting resistance to the Stamp Act, which listeners may remember is one of the egregious oversteps of the British that led to the Revolutionary War. And when they decide to stage their first protest, they go to this giant elm and they have their protest there. That becomes kind of a gathering place for the future protest. And so one day in August, they hang a public official in effigy there, which is to say they make a dummy of the public official and they hang him. Again, as part of the resistance to the Stamp Act, a big mob comes over there. They behead the effigy. They drag it over to the guy's house. Not nice.
Nice. And it's just like, I mean, I get the spirit of it, but it's like anytime there's a tree, I guess someone's going to hang someone from it.
Yes. Yeah. My goodness.
Yeah, it's like a particular dark instinct takes over there. And it's a direct threat to a public official. I mean, it's clearly a suggestion of violence. And then a few weeks later, a little copper plate appears in the tree that declares it the Tree of Liberty. So this is the first Liberty tree. And, these things spread, right? It's kind of like the meme of liberty, and it spreads to Rhode Island and South Carolina and in all of these different cities where these Sons of Liberty spinoffs are starting up. They create their own Liberty tree to have their meetings, to stage their protest. It's a really cool sort of connective tissue for the revolution.
But kind of radical. I was going to say cool, but kind of radical. Like, it doesn't have that sort of sweet story, I think, that you would think of. I think the tree works, but the tree becomes also a place of violence. So it's kind of hard to squeeze. But
I think, Kellie, that is worth lingering on because you're our historian of violence. And I think we like kind of sweet stories about the American Revolution, right? Obviously, war is war. But this idea that it was this clash of ideologies, this clash of visions for the future, as though it weren't steeped from the very beginning with violence, because it has to be. I mean, that's what anti-colonialism is, right? It's violence against a violent power that is oppressing you. And so it's important that this is a violent moment.
Well, it also reframes, and, I think there's historians who have pointed this out, it reframes a little bit of the idea of who were the engines of the revolution. And it wasn't just, religious leaders, say, in churches, or moreover, kind of politicians in white wigs making high-minded arguments. It was like a bunch of rabble-rousers gathering under a tree under cloak of darkness and coming up with schemes. And so I just think, centering the Liberty tree and what kind of gatherings took place under it recasts a little bit of your understanding, to Niki's point, of, what it means to be anti-colonial.
There was a loyalist at the time who sees the Liberty Tree and he says, this tree was concentrated for an idol for the mob to worship. And that idea that being a mob is kind of the shot against democracy too. And the tree stood for both of those things, right? It was the mob who was beheading the effigy. And it was also the mob in the sense that, as you were saying, Jody, like they're not meeting in a courthouse or a public house. It's not about voting at the time. Like only about 15% of people were enfranchised. So you have this wide open space where suddenly anyone, maybe not anyone, but where lots more people can come and speak, share ideas, and participate in the revolution. And they don't have to be part of the elite of Boston. They get to be part of the mob. And the mob, in a way, is part of the vision of democracy.
But it's also not so secret, meaning like if I were to think of a tree like a weeping willow, I'd be like, okay, this might give us some cover, while we plot and plan. But the trees are super tall. The branches go very, very high. It would be a space that everyone could sort of see what you were doing. And in that sense, it might gather sort of its own momentum where people will want to know what's going on, sort of like having their own sort of stage, if you will, for people to gather around.
Well, this is the really fascinating thing. I'm curious what each of you kind of where you come down on this, but it's like these trees become a meme in a sense. And I'm curious that dynamic between, I think, a big, large tree in a small town. And we have to remember, even Boston is a very small town at this point. A big, large tree in the center of town is going to be a natural gathering point. But then at some point, it also does become a kind of concerted effort to turn these into a thing, right? And you see the plaque is put in the one in Boston, but then other cities sort of pick up on it and say, hey, we're going to turn our big tree into a meeting ground. And so, I don't know, what's your sense of the dynamic between the two? Like, were people going to meet under the big tree in the center of town regardless? Or does it become a kind of concerted propaganda effort in a sense?
Even if they were going to be meeting under the big tree regardless, the way that they understood the big tree is changed by this transformation of the language of the tree of liberty or the liberty tree. Sure. That there is something about the forging of a shared political culture that goes beyond just like we all like to hang out under the big tree in our town. It really does become, I'm going to this tree, and in going to this tree, I'm aligning myself with the cause of the revolution, with the cause of liberty, and against the British, right? Like I'm outing myself as you're saying, Kellie, in a kind of open and dangerous way as somebody who is not a loyalist and is going to support this move against Britain.
Yeah, it's political and public. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's sort of, funnily enough, reminds me a little bit of like a lot of modern protests, or a lot of protests we see, period, where people just sort of declare a space to be something, right? And so like, I don't know, Occupy Wall Street, right? They take Zuccotti Park and they call it like the People's Park or whatever. And it's like, well, you could have, people were gathering here it was a public park, people were gathering here all the time to begin with. But once you give it that sort of name, Liberty Plaza or the People's Park or whatever, it consecrates it in a sense. The violence continues throughout a lot of these. I mean, Kellie, there's an incident where people are like tarred and feathered at this thing.
Yikes.
And
yeah.
people are, it is, I mean,
listen, the colonial period was not known for its soft touch.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, when they meant political violence, people risked their lives and lost their lives. I mean, it was violent. They would not just tar and feather people, but, they kept people's, decaying carcasses in giblets, those sort of like cages. I mean, it feels very like medieval to us, but like that was very much a part of like common practice. There's spectacles of, political violence put on display for everyone to sort of see. And it's meant to be a cautionary tale. It's meant to be a lesson. If this is what happens to you, if you don't agree, if we don't agree with you, or if we see you in opposition to us, it's a lot more actually common than we think.
Hello, this is Matt from the Explorers Podcast. I want to invite you to join me on the voyages and journeys of the most famous explorers in the history of the world. These are the thrilling and captivating stories of Magellan, Shackleton, Lewis and Clark, and so many other famous and not so famous adventurers from throughout history. Go to explorerspodcast.com or just look us up on your podcast app. That's the Explorers Podcast.
This day is brought to you by Quince, where you can find luxury, affordable wardrobe staples that'll carry you through the fall season. And not just you, but me, where I recently snagged a new pair of khakis. And not just you, not just me, but the whole This Day team. I have got everyone here hooked. Niki scored a flow knit full zip hoodie, which is a great sweatshirt for transition to the fall. She says it is smooth to the touch and that she is wearing it all the time, which I can attest to because I have seen her wearing it a number of times during our tapings. Kellie texted me that she has a navy blue button-down dress that has, wait for it, it has pockets. She says that people have been asking her nonstop where she got it. And the answer, of course, is she got it at Quince. Find all of your fall staples at Quince right now. Go to quince.com/thisday for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada, too. That's QUINCE.com/thisday to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/thisday. Fall is here, and with it comes cooler nights, heartier meals, and the craving for something warm and satisfying, which is where HelloFresh comes in, bringing you comforting, chef-designed recipes and fresh seasonal ingredients right to your door. I will tell you one thing about comfort cooking in the fall. I love it, but it can be really time and labor intensive. Lots of time in the oven, soups, baking. Sometimes I want to be able to make something quick and delicious and hearty on a weeknight. And that's where HelloFresh is stepping up. They recently doubled their number of recipes, their biggest menu refresh ever, and I've been exploring a lot of the options, including the pescatarian options. HelloFresh is helping me eat more fish. The other night, I made some herby salmon with red pepper cream sauce, and it comes with couscous, and you roast up some zucchini and onions. It took just about half an hour for it all to come together, totally doable on a weeknight, but also satisfying to cook it with your hands rather than ordering food or making something out of the freezer. The best way to cook just got better. Go to HelloFresh.com/thisday10FM. You'll get 10 free meals and a free item for life, 1 per box with active subscription. Free meals applied as discount on first box. New subscribers only. Varies by plan. Once again, that's HelloFresh.com/thisday10FM. You'll get 10 free meals and a free item for life.
And it happens at these Liberty trees. Like there is another guy who's from the British Customs Office who is dragged to the Liberty tree, and he has a noose put around his neck as a threatening of a hanging, although he's not ultimately hanged. But these trees then become so symbolic of the revolution. Thomas Paine writes a poem about it, and the British, when war finally breaks out, they go and they find this Liberty tree and they cut it down. They see it too as like a symbol of the revolution.
This is one of their first acts. I mean, It's like 2 months after Lexington and Concord, they're like, we got to go cut down that tree in 1775. Yeah, kind of amazing. So you see how contested it is. And then what do people do?
They call it the Liberty Stump, and then they put a little Liberty pole on it. It's
good
great.
For them. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Liberty Stump, the Liberty poles, and then also how some of the places beyond Boston, which I think is the most famous Liberty tree. And there's a great plaque right now, actually a very beautiful plaque where that Liberty tree used to stand in Boston. But, as we said, there are Liberty trees then declared in Providence and Connecticut and Annapolis, Maryland, as we're going to discuss. Charleston, South Carolina has one. And people also do start to put up Liberty poles. And these are obviously not as pretty as trees, but they have a similar function. They're a place to gather and meet and share news and plot sometimes. And people would put up like broadsides against the crown's tyranny there and do meetings and speeches and so forth. And there's some talk that there's some idea that the Liberty pole actually specifically has a lineage back to Roman times as a kind of gathering spot. But let's cut to Annapolis, or come back to Annapolis, which is the hook here and the tree that we're discussing. So this tree that was on what would become the campus of St. John's College, it was really the hub for all of the people who were aligned with the Sons of Liberty in that region. So people like Samuel Chase and William Paca, who would go ahead and sign the Declaration of Independence, they would gather for meetings and lead meetings under the Liberty Tree at St. John's. George Washington also resigned his military commission as the commander of the Continental Army a decade later in 1783. And he would do that near that tree. And after the war, the trees continue to kind of have this, I don't know, symbolic meaning. And so, Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter in which he talked about this very famous line: the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. We could do a whole episode on that particular line. I know we're taking the tree angle here, but any quick thoughts on that line? And had you connected it to the actual specific liberty trees, or did you think it was pure metaphor in that sense?
If you would have asked me this a week ago, I would have said metaphor. I would have said he was just sort of trying to be poetic. But given what we know about these trees, it puts it into a lot more context in terms of how we think about these trees as sites of resistance.
It's interesting the afterlife that line has, because it is picked up by all sorts of groups who see violence as a necessary means for gaining their political ends. I mean, the far right has certainly, and the not so far right, right? This is one of those lines that you would have heard on January 6th at the insurrection at the Capitol, that you would have seen on Tea Party signs in the 2010s. This is definitely a line that deserves its own episode.
Yeah, for sure. So, the Liberty Tree continues to have, as I said, meaning. I mean, if the specific physical tree, say the one in Boston, was no longer there have been efforts throughout the decades and centuries to kind of keep that spirit of that tree alive. So as I said, there's this, I think, pretty beautiful plaque, or it's kind of like a relief of a tree that was installed on the third floor of a brick warehouse right over in Boston where the Liberty Tree once stood. And it's still out there, and it's really pretty, and it reads Sons of Liberty, 1765, independence of their country, 1776. There was a movement in the 60s to try and get a new tree planted at that site, but instead there was another bronze plaque that was put up right across from there. And then one of my favorite little tidbits, in 1964, a 23-foot tall silver aluminum Liberty Tree was made for the World's Fair, which in that year took place in New York. But then they hauled it back up to Boston, put it on Boston Common, and people were like, this is really ugly. We don't want this. And a couple years later, they got rid of it. But
it reminds me so much of that era. And the Charlie Brown Christmas, where they have all of those aluminum Christmas trees. It reminds me of that. It's such a mid-century aesthetic, and nobody wants to sit under your giant metal tree.
Yeah.
No, people want real trees. Give us the real deal or nothing at all.
Yeah, totally. So we should say, obviously the tree on the St. John's campus was taken down in 1999, but there are a lot of descendants of this tree, including 200 seedlings at an Eastern Shore tree nursery. A scion of this, and I learned that scion is basically like a graft of an original tree that has the same DNA, but there is a scion of this tree planted on the St. John's campus that remains alive and well today. So, the lineage lives on.
I just think it's interesting that Marquis de Lafayette has this great line in 1825 where he says, "The world should never forget where once stood the Liberty Tree, so famous in your annals." Yeah. And I think there's something about that, because the world kind of did forget. I don't think we have that tree sort of looming in our public imagination. Certainly as we go to celebrate the 250, that has sort of lost its symbolism or appeal. But I don't know, maybe, and I would say maybe it's worth rethinking about again, but given the fact that it's so violent, I don't know.
Yes, that's a good point.
I'm a big fan of bringing it back. Not because of the violence part of it, but because there is a kind of populist expression behind it, right? That it's kind of a place where anyone can gather. And it is a symbol. I mean, the revolution was violent. We can't get around that,
revolutions
right?
are violent. Yes.
And there is something, I think that there's something hopeful and even sweet about the idea of like taking these seedlings or taking some of these seeds and beginning to plant them, because in a way it's not as much about the violence but about the hope for the future, right? That from this something better can grow, and you might not see it in your lifetime, but you're planting the seeds for something. Now you're going to get all three of your metaphors, Jody. You're planting the seeds for something that will continue to grow and bloom and sustain people for generations to come. And that's the big idea that I think these liberty trees represent.
Yeah.
I'm on board with bringing these back both in the public memory and as actual trees. As we said before, I just think looking at the revolutionary efforts through the lens of what happened under those trees just gives you a better understanding of what was going down. But also, the specific gathering spot. I mean, look, we're releasing this episode a couple of days before we're all going to head to DC for this teach-in. And I think one of the big sort of ideas there was to say, like, we need to gather together and share ideas in person again. And if a tree gives you reason to do that, great. What's the phrase? Like, go touch grass. I'm like, go sit tree or whatever. Go sit, touch tree. But it's like, it's that, and which I think is really important these days. Like, we need to hash out our ideas, not online, but, in person and together. And without also ignoring, Kellie, to your point, that sometimes that can get a little messy and violent and it's not ideal. But yes, I would rather that stuff happen sort of together in person. And we should point out that, yes, we are heading towards America250, and there have been some efforts to kind of bring the Liberty Tree thing back. So there have been some kind of like direct descendants of the original Liberty Trees planted around. And then Pennsylvania seems to be really the engine behind a lot of this. But there is a whole Liberty Tree project in Pennsylvania. It is funded by in parts, the Pennsylvania Freemasons are behind this, but then there's also America250 PA, which is the organizing body there in Pennsylvania, has a Liberty Tree project, and they want to plant a Liberty Tree in all of Pennsylvania's 67 counties. And they started a couple years ago, and the goal is by the end of 2026, the semi-quincentennial, to have Liberty trees planted throughout. But I think one of the big lessons here is you don't need to plant a Liberty tree. You can just go find a tree and say, that's the Liberty tree. So,
get yourself a bronze plaque and get to work.
Yeah, just declare it.
Yeah, I love it. I love a good pine tree, just saying.
Okay, great. Someone go make Kellie's Liberty tree on a pine nearby, and we'll just keep it going.
I love it.
We'll make a map. All right. Well, I'm really glad we got to this one. Super fascinating. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day is a proud member of Radiotopia, a network of independent, artist-produced podcasts. Don't forget to sign up for our America250 Watch newsletter. Every Thursday, members get exclusive access to analysis and information about the upcoming semi-quincentennial, commentary from our team, and a list of fascinating things that happened that week throughout history. Join in, find out lots more at thisdaypod.com. You can also follow This Day Pod on Instagram, Blue Sky, and YouTube. Jacob Feldman is our researcher. Brittany Brown is our editor. My name is Jody Avirgan. See you soon.
Radiotopia.